So today we're starting on a fun project, a little different than what we normally do, but we got this walnut table in. It was dried, but not kiln dried. So some of this wood here actually started to shrink and the seams pulled apart. So we're gonna actually deconstruct this table, put it in the kiln to finish drying it, and then rebuild it from the ground up. So what we are going to do is cut this seam right down the middle and split this into the 3 different sections that it originally was. We've got a slab on either side and then probably about an 8-inch dimensional piece in the center. That way we remove the least amount of wood possible because we'll be splitting it down the center of the seam. Okay, so we've got our slabs cut in half or in thirds, and we can kind of see a little bit of the glue joint. Really was not that strong to begin with. Then with the extra movement of the wood was all it needed to just split and crack. Over here you can kind of see they used glue and epoxy to kind of fill in any voids here where the glue joint didn't match up. That's basically just a fill. It's not really going to add any structural strength to the wood. They did use a few dowels, although on a piece of wood this big, you need to use a lot thicker dowels if you want to strengthen the joint. So we're going to put this back on the track saw, just make one more pass. That way we can open up this wood here from this epoxy so that the trip in the kiln can actually properly dry it. Otherwise, this wood here would not be able to let off the moisture at the same rate that this edge would, and it's going to mess up the drying process. So we'll go ahead and do that, and then we'll be ready to take it to the kiln. All right, so we've got the slabs all cut. We cleaned up the edges so that most of the glue and epoxy is removed. We'll go ahead and sand the top real quick and then the bottom as well to kind of get that epoxy off again so that the wood can properly dry. When we check the moisture content on these slabs, they range from about 12 to almost 16% in some spots. So it's close to being dry enough, but it really should be dried a little bit more. So we're just going to finish it up in the kiln. Wood that's typically air dried in this area will stabilize somewhere between 14 to say 18, 20% range. So after that point, it needs to be put in a kiln to finish it up. Ideally, you want to see slabs somewhere in the 10% range or just a little bit below. But again, that's going to depend on the part of the country you live in and what your average moisture content is inside a livable environment like your house. One more point before we finish up here today is when you are constructing a table or looking to have one built, please make sure that you check the moisture content before starting your project. Don't just take people's word for that the wood is properly dried. Always check the moisture content. So you can either have them do that or get yourself a moisture meter. Another thing to remember is that when you're having someone build a table for you, make sure that you kind of vet their credentials a little bit. Make sure that they know what they're doing. Have them show you some of their projects. This table had some good intentions by the builder, but obviously they did not quite know what they were doing and probably shouldn't have taken on this job for the customer. Okay, so we are back with this walnut table. It's made a nice trip through the kiln. We spent probably 5 to 6 weeks in the kiln, put it in with another load, so probably didn't need to be in quite that long, but we've got the moisture content down to about 8 to 10%. Just a few things here that I'd like to point out. While this wood was drying, it shrunk, twisted, moved a little bit, and you can see some of these epoxy joints here had pulled apart from the wood. A little crack showed up, and again, that's because of the wood drying. This would have happened in a house or a building that this piece was in had it not been put through the kiln. Would have taken maybe a year or two instead of just a month, but definitely a recipe for disaster if not properly corrected. These slabs here, we've actually run through the planer. We took about 1/4 inch off just to get them the same thickness, get them flat again, ready for the glue up. And so we'll go over that today. One more thing I'd like to point out, just to kind of show how much the wood shrinks. These dowels were put in and cut absolutely flush with the surface when we separated this table apart into pieces. But through the drying process in the kiln, the walnut has shrunk at a different rate than these probably beech dowels. Each one of them sticking out maybe a little bit, maybe like a 1/16 or 32nd of an inch. Those will get trimmed off when we do this edge, but that just shows you how much the wood moves when it dries. Okay, so we've got our track on the slab, our depth set on the saw, and we're ready to trim this edge to make a real nice smooth glue line. We're going to go ahead and start our first cut. So we are making progress on this table. We've got all these edges cut nice and crisp, ready to glue together. If you'll notice, there's a few spots here that are a little high or low, have a little bit of twister, warp to them. So the dominoes will really help with that. The most important part is that our edges are nice and straight, they're square, the surface is real crisp. So when we get those joints put together, it's going to be nice and tight. We've got the dominoes all marked where we're going to drill the holes, and we've got a domino tenon going in about every foot along the whole length of the table, just a little shy of 8 feet. We're using 2 different sizes, both 1/2 inch thick, which are the 14mm dominoes. These are about 4 inch, and these are 5.5 inch. We're going to put the 5.5 inch on either end just to help with a little bit of that twist that's in the centerpiece here. That's going to help pull it together, and then these shorter ones are going to go in the center, kind of like a big zipper. So we're getting ready for a major upgrade from what we started with. These were just 1/2 inch dowels that they used, which were a good start to the project, but don't add near enough strength or stabilization as these guys do. I mean, look at the difference here in size. They're about the same, about 1/2 inch, but the size difference is just a lot bigger. It's going to add a lot more strength and line stuff up a whole lot better. We're using the Festool Domino XL. It's a 700. It's the biggest domino machine that they make. So we're going to be drilling holes. We've got all of our settings set just right. Let's go ahead and fire it up and get to work. So now that we're finished with the domino machine, we are ready to start the glue up. We've got our dominoes laid out. We've got our jug of glue, wet rag so we can wipe up any drips. This is something you want to kind of lay out beforehand. Think of the process and everything you might need before you start putting the glue down, because once you start spreading glue, it's going to start to dry on you if you take too long. So you're kind of under the gun to get the job done quickly. little hang-ups or grabbing extra tools or things that you forgot might make it a little harder to get the joint tight in the end. I'm going to start off by putting some glue in each one of these domino holes. How much to put in is something you have to kind of develop over time, a sense for, but we're just using this pencil here to spread the glue around on the inside. That way it glues that domino in nice and tight. I always like to put a little bit too much glue down. That way I'm not a little dry on one side, because then I'll have a little gap in my glue joint. And that creates problems that's hard to fix later on. I'll have a little bit of glue leaking out, have a bit of a mess to clean up here, but at least I know I'll have plenty glue to hold my piece together. Just making sure that everything's spread around as even as possible. You want all the surface covered with glue. Okay, so we are finished gluing up this table. It's now ready to dry. Had a couple hiccups along the way. Some of these slabs weren't perfectly level, especially the center piece here. And so it got a little tight, a little dicey trying to get the last little bit squeezed together. One of the things we did, and it's a nice little trick, is we use some ratchet straps. Sometimes these clamps you just can't get to really bite in or give enough pressure. And we were causing the wood to actually bow up because of all these clamps on the top. So we put some ratchet straps underneath, cranked those things down. They're as tight as banjo strings now. That helped everything get sucked together, helped keep everything level. Just a little tool to have in your back pocket in case you get in some problems, run out of clamps, or something's just not working out right. These ratchet straps will put a whole lot more pressure on the slab or the wood than the clamps actually will. So that worked out. So we got all the glue joints nice and tight. I'm not able to find any gaps right now, so hopefully that'll be the case whenever we pull these clamps off and it's dried. We'll go ahead and do that later, but for now, we finished. We'll let this dry overnight and come back in the morning and pick up where we left off. Well, our glue up has turned out really good. We let it dry overnight, the glue cured, we took the clamps and the straps off. We got some really nice glue joints. There's a little bit of leveling we'll need to do, nothing too major. I just kind of drew for reference these little white lines that show where each one of those dominoes are placed. So if you're going to be cutting your table down, it's important that you remember where those dowels of the dominoes are so you don't cut right through the middle of one. So we've got some epoxy, some Starbond, filling up these little cracks and crevices here. This was all stuff that the previous builder didn't really get done too well. So we're going to have to sand all these off. To get the sanding job done, we're going to use the Festool Rotex RO150. It's a 6-inch sanding head rotary sander, and so it takes a lot of material off, has a very smooth sanding finish. You can also use a belt sander, but I would kind of discourage that because it really gouges the material, especially when you have spots that have all this figure here. The belt sander basically drags across and does remove material, but it creates a lot of damage to the surface, which can take a long time to sand out. So just be careful if you are using a belt sander that you don't sand too aggressively, and you'll need to sand those gouge marks that it creates out in order to get your nice sanding surface done for the finish you're going to put on. Well, we've got a little bit of sanding done here. What I've done is I've used the really aggressive sandpaper, 100 grit. This is the Festool Sapphire sandpaper. It holds up real well in aggressive sanding environments. And so what I usually like to do is just kind of use a used piece of sandpaper that's maybe about half its life left to kind of level all these spots where there's epoxy and Starbond. It's really hard on the sandpaper, and so I'll put a brand new sheet on once I've kind of gotten all that coarse stuff off, start smoothing it out from there. One thing I've noticed, and you'll see in just about every table that you build, if it's got any cracks or splits or anything you filled with epoxy, as you're sanding, you'll come across some little tiny spots that kind of open up. And so keep some super glue handy. Some of the Starbond works excellent. And that way you can kind of just go along and do little spot repairs as stuff comes up. Wait about 10 or 20 seconds and it's ready to sand. We've finished with the Rotec sander, so now we're going to start with the finish sander. We're going to start with a 120 grit and work up from there to a 150, then go to 180, and probably finish with a 220, depending on how the look goes of the wood. All right, so let's get started. Well, we have got the table all the way sanded. Again, we sanded it to 220 grit. A lot of this grain and figure turns out really nice. So we're gonna go ahead and move to the finishing part of the project here. The base coat is gonna be our Waterlox Universal Tung Oil Sealer. In the past, we've used the original sealer finish. This is a low VOC and VOC compliant formula, kind of the predecessor to the original finish. Works just as good, same principles and everything. So we're going to go ahead and use that here today, and just see this table come to life as we put finish on it. All right, we're going to put about 2 coats of this sealer on it, and again, this soaks into the wood, saturates the fibers and hardens, and then creates a good base layer for the finish coat, which really gives the table its shine and brings out a lot of the true colors. Now this finish is a little bit thicker in consistency than the original, but overall I really like how easy it goes on. Additionally, it doesn't have the petroleum or paint thinner smell or odor that the original finish has. So for me, it's not really a big deal, but if you're working in a house or an environment, or you're a little more sensitive to the odors or smells, or you just want to be a little more environmentally friendly, then this would be an excellent option to meet those needs. If you want to know more about how to put this finish on, you can click on our YouTube channel and find the video titled How to Apply Waterlox Finish. Even though we go over the original finish in that video, a lot of the same techniques are going to apply to this one here too. These are my favorite spots to put finish on, right here where you have some of this feather grain and figuring. Really pulls a lot of that look out when you get the finish on. Some of these spots here that soak up the oil a little bit more than other areas, you can go back over after a little while and just kind of resaturate them. I need just a little bit more. I think I probably used about 3.5 ounces to do this first coat. Of course, the second coat's going to take a little bit less, and so on and so forth, till we're just using almost a few drops to put our last coat on. All right. So we have got the finish on. The first coat is done. We're going to go ahead and wipe it off here in just a few minutes. But to wrap this project up, we're going to put on about 2 more coats of finish, then top it off with 1 to 2 coats of the satin to give it its ultimate protection bring out all the colors in the wood that we want to see. So with that, we're going to wrap this project up. We'll show some shots of the finished product here when we're done, and see the huge difference between the table when it first started off, when we got it through the doors here and had to cut it apart, to what it's going to look like when it's done. It'll be same table, but look completely different. Thanks for watching, and be sure to hit the subscribe button. Also, if you want to find out more tips on how to do woodworking projects, be sure to check out the rest of our videos.